The slop they served in prison was foul, toxic waste that masqueraded as food. The main course was a torrid-looking lumpy brown gloop that had a single limp brown overboiled carrot poking its little head out of a nightmarish sludge. It must have thought it was the 7th layer of hell. The wretched vegetable only had the company of a trio of grossly dehydrated yellowish peas that lay on top of the food like shelled-out carcasses on a desert dune. There may have been other poor victims within the gloop, but I simply did not have the stomach to delve into the abomination to find out. Flies hovered over the food, but as soon as they tasted the slop, they turned their noses up and sped away in disgust. The dessert on the food tray was what appeared to be a custard with such a high viscosity that it seemed impenetrable. Out of curiosity to see if this was the case, I grabbed the plastic spoon that came with the tray and tried to penetrate the armour. The spoon crumbled in my hand. I could make out the faint outline of something hidden underneath a protective layer of the custard, but it was a mystery that I was never going to find out. The only thing I consumed from these terrible meals was a small juice box which I became rather attached to. When you've eaten nothing for 2 weeks, a juice box becomes the most divine nectar of the gods. The cell itself was certainly not the homeliest of places. Cold, blood-stained concrete flooring reflected light from a bright but ghostly LED bulb that intruded the cell's every nook. A small concrete bed that was embedded into the wall stuck out, and a thin blue plastic-covered mattress lay on top of it. A corner of the mattress appeared to have been gnawed, leaving chewed-up sponge that seeped out the hole like spilled guts. A grey-stained pillow that has more bubbles than pillow hid in the corner of the bed in fear of further maltreatment. The obligatory metal toilet sat in the far corner of the cell. Skid marks encrusted the bowl with white mould and bacteria battling out for the leftover scum. The metal sink and taps stuck out of the wall. Both were armoured with rust, and the tap pathetically dribbled water when turned on full. There was a small barred window about 4 meters from the floor that welcomed the cold in gladly. Certainly the room itself was somewhat minimalist and not quite my cup of tea, but I've lived in worse in my time. The prison guards seemed to be unable to comprehend the simple concept that we put an aggressive beast in a small cage and taunted it would be the very best idea to then go into said cage without the necessary protection. Manners do not cost a thing, but not having manners cost them rather dearly. It was decided that for their own safety, and that of the other inmates, solitary confinement was a necessity. Of course, I did not let this change of cell be an easy task for them. It didn't require extensive mathematical ability to do so, as I was going to remain in prison following my eventual trial for a very long time. If there was an equation to deduce how long it would be, X would have certainly equaled fucked. Imprisonment was something that I swore never to return to, and always put measures in place to ensure that the risk of capture was as low as it could be when I earned my income. Had fun and carried out my campaign to save the bumblebees. And such methods were working all rather well until I became convinced that I was insane. When your main form of income is from home invasions, theft, and street robberies, a decent level of situational awareness, cat-like reactions, and of course a sane mind are all required. When you've lost all trust in your mental faculties, then such work becomes a far riskier venture, something I learned the hard way. It wasn't the actual mugging that went wrong. The issue was that I wasn't cautious, and witnesses soon came across the scene. This in itself wasn't the fatal blow, but it was a starting domino. Without the trust of sanity, I was easily spooked, meaning that rather than engage the situation, I sprinted away at full pelt, my balaclava still pulled down over my face. Whilst running away, neurotic thought after neurotic thought rumbled on by about my mental volatility, drowning out my common sense and environmental feedback. During this ill-thought-out escape, due to the jostling, the hair under my balaclava kindly moved round to cover my right eye. Rather than rectify this, my mind found itself trying to determine whether the world around me was actually reality. While looking, I ran onto a road and a double-decker bus smashed right into my side. I was knocked out. A fair few stitches were required and my face grew to the size of a watermelon, but aside from that, no breakages. The doctor said it was a miracle that I survived and so relatively unscathed. He was quite a nice fellow and he seemed sincere about helping people, so I do somewhat regret biting his finger off when he did a quick check-up on me. What can I say? I wasn't in the best of moods. I was handcuffed to a bed in a strange-looking place and I'd come to the horrific discovery that they had shaved my head. They said they did this because there was a significant infestation that resided in it, so naturally I resorted to such reasonable action. To be fair, I'm sure he had it reattached and it would probably become a funny story around the dinner table in a week or two. I was originally denied bail and at first I was only going to be sentenced for 2 counts of robbery. But these minor offences quickly escalated due to what I'd done to the doctor and the prison guards and the other prisoners. Also, unfortunately, in the eyes of authorities, the fact that I had only mildly tortured the prisoners and guards wasn't going to work in my favour. I, of course, saw it differently, as such dislocations to their body would surely have invigorated them in future to act with more appropriate decorum. And now even a con artist, fortune teller of the most bargain basement kind had predicted that I was going to end up in solitary confinement. There was certainly a silver lining to the whole solitary confinement ordeal. That had been allowed me to spend a good 72 hours continuously meditating. This was in part due to having nothing else to do, but there was also enough sanity left in me to force myself into that act of self-medication. The epiphany that came from this was that I could put faith back into my mind. Such deep thought and self-analysis simply could not find any significant deterioration of my senses or thoughts. Each neuron and synapse was up to the correct specification. I started to grasp that the experience of a black Scottish terrier was simply a glitch in my programming, one that hadn't infected the system as a whole. Although I felt confident about putting near complete faith back into my mind, the more instinctive side of me was still erring on the idea that some sort of supernatural being had indeed engaged in communication with me. That feeling was a stain I could not wash from my mind. Paradoxically, it was deeply linked to my trust in my own self, and I simply could not reject such a notion. Instead, I simply chose not to react to these confusing feelings. This meant that such thoughts be allowed the place and stage, but like a madman shouting predictions of Armageddon in public would not be taken seriously. Within solitary confinement, there was certainly a lack of stimuli. This being a factor that could easily drive a sane man to irreversible mental ill health. However, for my part, it helped me to force the mind into introspection and allow me to ultimately quieten it. Perhaps if I allowed myself further meditation, I could have reached higher planes of thought. Yet even if I sought such a divine purpose, I knew there's one chain I could not break free from, and I would be dragged down from the heavens kicking and screaming. The tyrant that held this leash had been passively putting up with the fact that it had not been feasting on the treats that it had become so accustomed to. It was not one that would lower itself to eat the prison slop that was served, and it was not going to silently accept the present situation. I toyed with the idea of escape from a prison, but that prospect was shot down. It's not because I would be relentlessly hunted and be forced to lie low. It's not because I would have to run away to somewhere as isolated as the Highlands of Scotland. It's not because the prospect of sex would have vanished like a puff of smoke. It is because there would be no more venturing to delicatessens for a slice of Munster stank with foul hedonism. It is because there would be no more morning partakes in the pitié decadent vinoceries. The beast below is not going to let such a horrible future take place. My stomach knew that if I escaped, my spice track would deteriorate, or if I could forage, the horrifying blandness of the food I would be forced to eat would shock it to its core. Fresh game would of course be delightful at first, but then I'd be damn near degraded into meat and a potatoes man. Nightmares could not be made of worse. No more Carolyn fish curries, no more pho, no more gyozas, no more Berico pork, no more chorizo, no more ackee and saltfish, no more jerk pork belly, no more gelato, no more homemade pasta, no more bibimbap, no more beef bouillon, no more Sichuan hot pot, no more vignon, no more freshly made sourdough, no more brie de mule, no more churros, no more gambas al ajillo, no more chicken mole burrito, no more parma ham, no more buffalo mozzarella, no more seafood linguine, and the list went on and on. It was a list that never ended, and it was a list that the tyrant below kept on reading out night after night as I lay in bed. I easily succumbed to such torture, became agreeable to whatever plan it had hatched. Although it didn't tell me what it was, I could feel it deep down in my gut, and I knew that I would know what I would need to do when the time was right. I was in the middle of a meditation when my opportunity came. My cell door swung open to reveal prison guards outfitted in combat gear, holding riot shields, each armed with batons. As they rushed in, a little smile crept onto my face, and my instinct excitedly cracked its knuckles. Just as the first two guards rushed in, I jumped to my feet, turned around, and hopped onto the side of the bed. In a flash, I leapt onto the wall where the small barred window was, and used the other foot to push off into the adjacent wall near the corner. I then pushed off that so that I had enough height to grab the bars on the window. I held the bars with both arms and pulled myself up onto the tight wall with both my feet pressed against the wall. 6 of the 8 prison officers were already in my cell when, like a swimmer, I launched myself at the back 2 of the 6. I was able to spin around and put my forearms in front of my face as I crashed into the 2 who stood in front of each other, blocking the entrance to my cell. They went flying out with me on top. 2 prison officers were outside the cell looking on in horror. I rolled off the 2 crumpled guards beneath me, and I yanked both their batons from their hands. I put one of the batons up to protect my head and stood up at the same time as one of the nearby guards in the corridor swung down at my head. I then used the pointed end of my other baton and stabbed it right into the officer's thigh with enough force that it penetrated into the flesh. Before the guard could scream in pain, I took advantage of his compromised position and ferociously stabbed at the side of his ribs with the other baton a couple of times. A loud snapping noise followed each stab. The guard fainted from the pain and collapsed as he started to fall. I ripped the baton out of his leg and gave him a violent front kick so he went flying back into the 4 guards who were trying to get out of the cell. I felt a baton strike against my temple, but I had so much adrenaline pumping through me, might as well have been made out of styrofoam. I turned to the culprit in the corridor, charged him right in his shield, and pushed him until he was pressed against the wall. Then, like a boxer picking apart holes in his opponent's defense, I stabbed at every opening all over his body with the pointed ends of the batons. The guard screamed out in pain, both his arms slumped down, and he dropped his shield. I put both my clenched hands around his helmeted head and pulled it down into a knee so ferocious that it caused his head to fly back into the wall. Shards of his helmet scattered across the corridor as he slumped to the floor. One of the 2 guards that previously went flying into had gotten up. The other was halfway up from the floor when he felt my foot come into his face. His visor broke and smashed against his visage, causing blood to splatter against it as his head shot around the body as it was in orbit, pulling his whole body onto his backside to smash into the ground. I then ran after the guard who was up on her feet. She put a shield up as her side to protect herself. I jumped right up into the air and landed on an overhead elbow right onto the top of her helmet. The helmet buckled and a large elbow imprint was left in it as she crumpled to the floor. I spun around and saw that one guard from the cell had been able to get over the body of his unconscious colleague, and was now in the corridor with me. Behind him, a fellow guard was trying to get out of the entrance with 2 more trailing her. I threw my batons at her, trying to leave the cell, to cause a split-second distraction, and then sprinted at the guard and flying drop-kicked her. She went flying back into the 2 guards behind her, and smashed into them as if they were bowling pins. After my attack, I landed horizontal on the floor, and the guard that was outside the cell started to whack at me whilst I was down there. He only got 1 strike to my head and 1 to my spine before I was able to roll onto my back. The next strike, I stopped by catching his wrist with my left hand and grabbing the outside of his hand at the same time, twisting it whilst keeping his wrist stationary, then pushing my hand down and forward until it was flat on his forearm. As he screamed in pain, I pulled him forward and lifted up his plastic visor. The briefest look of surprise and then dread filled his face as he figured out what was going to happen next. I grabbed the sides of his helmet and forced him down to be headbutted. 1 for damage, 1 to make sure he's out cold, and 1 for good luck. I pushed an unconscious guard off me and sprang to my feet. I picked up 2 batons off the floor and placed myself just outside the entrance of the cell. The 3 guards were now up and ready. 2 of them did not look particularly enthusiastic about their current situation. The more confident one in the centre turned to either side to encourage his compatriots. "Come on, let's get him!" he pleaded to the other 2. Both the other guards turned away from his gaze in embarrassment. "Die, you fucking chink cunt!" The more brave guard roared as he charged at me with his shield in front and baton behind him ready to swing. I took a few steps back so he ended up out in the corridor, more exposed. Just before he reached me, I sidestepped him, tilting my head so the baton just missed. The guard had too much momentum as he passed. I gave a rapid stab to the side of his exposed rib cage. The guard gasped, stumbled, and then fell to the ground. I quickly went up behind him and stabbed the other baton with enough force that it went through his trousers and became deeply lodged in his rectum. The man let out a sharp squeal and passed out. I turned around to look at the 2 guards left standing. Before I could even take my first step, they both dropped their shields and batons, and I gave a little pout as I was looking forward to the fight. Both quickly did as I asked, and both kept their gazes firmly at the ground. To make sure they knew the place, they gave 1 a quick thrashing until she was out cold. The other I left unharmed, as the plan was to seek help from him with regard to the navigation of the prison. I felt that he understood what would happen if he didn't give me what I wanted. As he started to talk, the prison alarm erupted. Based on what he said, though, and even with the prison being on lockdown, I would still be able to go through my plan. What I might do after, that was of course a different story. Even with all the adrenaline pumping through me, I could feel that my body was experiencing the side effects of that sudden burst of exercise. Self-care was important, especially if I wanted to be at my fighting best, so I did a few dynamic stretches. I rolled my shoulders forward, I rolled them backwards, I swung my arms around forwards and then backwards. I jogged on the spot, swinging my heels back to hit my rear end. I jogged with my knees going up as high as possible, and I twisted my body from one side to another. Unfortunately, I didn't have time to do a full set as the police would be on their way. "What?" I snapped at the confused-looking guard when I finished my stretches. He quickly looked away. I then looked for a pair of boots that would be my size. It only took a couple of tries but I found the perfect fit. I quickly tied up all the unconscious guards around their wrists and ankles with plastic cable ties from their pockets. I put a cable tie around the neck of the one guard who was still conscious, connected it to another cable tie which was connected to another, and this went on until it formed a chain that was like a leash. I needed him to lead the way and also to open the gates. I then ripped up all the guards' clothes, twisted them into ropes and tied them around the unconscious hostages so that they were bunched together like bananas. I then crisscrossed the remaining fabrics to become another makeshift rope that I threaded in, out and all around their feet. Lead the way. I'm sure you can imagine that any untoward behaviour will leave you quite the unhappy chappy, I told the guard. I gave him a shove and we meandered down the hallway whilst I held his leash and dragged the unconscious hostages behind me with a makeshift rope. The hallways flashed with red lights whilst the sirens blared out. That meant the walk wasn't the most pleasant. We reached a couple of abandoned gates, both of which my guide was able to open. Surprisingly, there was no other foes to greet me. I asked the conscious guard why this was. He said that staffing had been reduced greatly due to funding cuts, so there weren't that many guards in the prison in the first place. He then said there were probably only a handful left who had sealed off the prison and were waiting for police support. Unfortunately, we had to cross through 2 prison wings. The conscious guard was probably thinking that I was going to let all the prisoners out. That certainly was not on my mind.
Ha! Ha! Nice one. Oi, mate, open doors for me. I said open the fucking doors. Oi, you fucking chink packy cunt.
Let us out, blood. Blood, I'm still talking to you. Oh shit, you know. You, the chink. Gaz, it's a chink. Remember me? Remember me? Remember what you fucking did? When I get out of here, I'm gonna fucking kill you. Fuck me, it's a chink. Mate, we took out the Hardy Boys crew together, remember? Come on, free me, mate. Fucking get me out of here, come on.
Oh, I'm wanting some of that. But one of least, he looks so pretty.
I moved through the wings, ignoring the pleas and the threats. I had to stick to the plan. If I stayed any longer, I'd probably have spent too much time taking out my aggression lows behind the cell doors. They weren't the most respectful of sorts. I also spotted a few characters from my distant past I certainly wasn't fond of. When we reached the dining hall, it was a bit difficult trying to manoeuvre the guards through all the chairs and tables. They occasionally got trapped under a table, something that caused a fair few frustrated sighs. We then reached a large red-padded steel reinforced door at the end of the dining hall, where a leashed guard put a key in to unlock it, then a few more keys to unlock a few more locks, until the final one was done. The conscious guard then opened the door. Here we are, he mumbled meekly. I was glad that we finally reached it. The other guards at that point announced that awoken by giving the odd muffled scream. I'm not the most patient of sorts when hungry, so I went over and gave a few kicks until they quietened. I then dragged them into the kitchen and instructed the leash guard to open the locked drawers, cabinets, larder rooms, fridges, the cooking utensil cage and the freezers. I then ordered him to lock the main kitchen door and took his keys off him. I was a child in a sweet shop. Mind you, it is a shop where the sweets were stale or stuck together, but when you've not eaten for 2 weeks, and such foodstuffs are still fit for a king. I secured my hostages and then excitedly went to look at what feast I might be able to make.